I'll start by unmuting myself. That is not a good omen. Hi, I'm Marcy Mallory. I'm the president of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, and thank you for joining us here this evening for our COVID-19 Champion Awards. This is the first time that we've done a virtual awards program. Typically, we meet and we celebrate together, but I'm very thankful for all of you to join us tonight to celebrate the amazing accomplishments of tonight's award winners. Before we start, I want to thank you all, members and donors, the award winners, and all of our sponsors, which we will talk about a little bit later. If you're new to the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation, you can find a little bit more about us at paparksandforest.org. I'd like to mention and introduce our board of directors. Brad Mallory will be speaking a little bit later. He's our chairman. Tina Molsky will also be speaking. She's our vice chairwoman. Our treasurer is Jim Grace, and our secretary is Mary Soderberg. Our board of directors also consists of Josie Bizik, Brian Clark, George Fernandez, Paul Fogel, Kate Harper, Mary Hurst, Brad Jones, Representative Mark Longjetti, Eric Madden, Maria Montero, and Eric Williams. So I'd like to start by welcoming Tina Molsky. As I mentioned, she is our vice chairwoman, and she is also the director of operations at REI's East Coast Distribution Center, and REI is one of our sponsors here tonight. They are making this possible. So Tina, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Marcy. I just want to say hello and welcome to all of you to the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation Virtual Awards. This past year truly has been a challenge, and for individuals and for families and for businesses. I think we've all done different things this past year as we lived through this pandemic. It was, however, wonderful to see so many find solace in Pennsylvania's amazing parks and forests. They were used more than ever during this pandemic. This, however, did create additional challenges for all of us, and a tremendous number of people stepped up in ways we never would have thought would have been needed to ensure everyone who wanted to visit a park or a forest could enjoy these great resources in a safe way. From sewing masks for staff at these facilities, to encouraging others to hike, bike, paddle, or camp, to taking the time to do some trail maintenance. We are excited to have this evening to thank all of you. We've put together a short video, and when I say we, I mean Amanda Galvin. She serves as the outreach specialist for REI's East Coast Distribution Center. As you watch the video, see if you can identify some of our parks and forests depicted in the video. Have a wonderful evening, and congratulations to all awardees.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you, REI. I think I recognized a few parks in that video, and if anybody else recognized them, feel free to put it in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube. I would also now like to introduce Brad Mallory. As I mentioned, Brad Mallory is the chair of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. Some of you might remember Brad as the secretary for the Department of Transportation during the Ridge administration. Brad, thanks so much for being here, and I look forward to hearing your remarks.
Well, my pleasure, Marcy. And first and foremost, a heartfelt congratulations to all those we recognize tonight. This is indeed their evening and your evening, and we're so grateful for everything you've done. One of my favorite musicians is a guy from Texas named Ray Wiley Hubbard. Not exactly the kind of music you might play when the parson comes to visit, but he has a line in a song that goes, "And the days that I keep my gratitude higher than my expectations, well, I have really good days." And I got to say, this is a really good day for all of us at the Parks and Forest Foundation and all of us who enjoy outdoor Pennsylvania because of what the people who we recognize tonight have done. You know, they fall in a couple of different categories. The frontline public employees from DCNR and elsewhere. I've decided from now on, I'm going to call them the thin green line, serving and protecting the public, you know, during the pandemic and beyond, before and beyond. A tough job, to say the least, and done with just skill and excellence and care and consideration. The support personnel in these public agencies. You know, somebody has to enable these frontline people to do their jobs and enable it to do them in a climate of scarcity and facing challenges that, frankly, probably most of us never conceived of or anticipated. And then the private individuals and businesses who stepped up to the plate, not getting paid to do this because they think it's the right thing to do. And indeed, it was the right thing to do. And I suspect that most of the people we recognize here tonight are saying, you know, why are you recognizing me? I mean, it's some combination of it's my job. I love what I do. Other people are doing this. Well, we're recognizing you because you have indeed exceeded expectations time and time again. And I rather suspect that what you've done is of more value than you even know, which is why we have the special keynote speaker that we have here this evening, because this is a gentleman who I think is going to help us come to an understanding of how vitally important what you are all about is. We're privileged to be joined by Dr. Michael Suk, who is system-wide chairman of the Geisinger Musculoskeletal Institute. I'll try to say that quickly. And a board trustee of the American Medical Association. Now, the agreed upon introduction only goes that far, but I can tell you I've read the rest. And it's impressive to say the least. And if I were you, I'd Google his name after this is all said and done, just to get a better sense of who you're about to hear from, what he's about to say. And for our purposes this evening, he is in fact one of the first and foremost proponents of the notion that, in fact, the natural experience can really enhance health. So with that, I give you Dr. Suk.
Well, thanks very much, Brad and Marcy and Tina, and to the board of advisors and trustees to the Parks and Forest Foundation. Really, it's my privilege to join you this evening, and I want to echo your hearty congratulations to the winners of the awards for this evening. Certainly, I think this pandemic has shown us many, many things, and among those things, Brad, I think, as you pointed out, individual volunteerism, corporate involvement, and organizational support for the Parks and Forests of Pennsylvania, I think, has been critical to really sustaining what I think is a very important passion of mine to talk about why, as you rightly say, the world of natural environments are really important to our individual health. And Pam, I'm wondering if it's possible to load up the slides that I had made, if we can do that. We'll go through them very quickly. I think it'll be helpful to try to showcase some of these ideas, and hopefully they'll resonate with the people who are watching and generate lots of discussion and hopefully some action. And so this is entitled "The Science Behind the Health Benefits of Nature." It's something that I've been passionate about for over 2 decades in multiple different environments, both as an orthopedic surgeon and also as a senior official within the federal government and the U.S. Department of the Interior. Next slide. So it starts, of course, with COVID. It's hard to talk about the world of nature, natural environments, and without taking into account this past year. And back in April, just as the COVID environment was taking off in 2020, I spent some time and I reflected in an article I wrote called "The Doctor's View: The Restorative Power of Nature During COVID-19." And this was really a set of recollections and reflections on noting the fact that as people started to lock down and shut down, I found that more people were turning to the outdoors, not because they felt that they had a scientific pull, but because they had a natural, visceral reason to be outside, to escape many of the realities that were going on around us, the uncertainty and the stress. And certainly today, as we talk, it feels like we're getting around the corner, which is wonderful news. I think the governor has made some recent pronouncements, and the vaccines are coming around the corner. And I think there's a much stronger ray of hope that tells us that we'll get back to normal, which will include many of the things we want to do outside. Next slide. So for the longest time, I think over the last many decades, we have always known, and studies have shown that with our young population, we know that being in natural environments plays a significant role in their development. And I sum it up by simply saying that it makes kids smarter, stronger, and better. It has effects on bullying. It has effects on cognitive behavior. It has effects on social interaction. It has an effect on the ability for children to be independent thinkers. And we can go on and look at the literature as it reflects on the influence of nature on our kids. But this is a pretty set mindset at this point, and I think most of us take this as granted, as a given. Next slide. But I think as we talk about adults, it becomes a little bit more fuzzy. I think the studies are not quite as replete, but we know that there are several studies out there that show some very significant health benefits to being in a natural environment. And I'll go through several of them here just to reinforce. And most of us who are watching this will have some visceral reaction or certainly nod their head and say, of course this is true. Why doesn't everybody know it? But you'd be surprised at the number of people who don't recognize that there's actually some scientific validity behind it. So one example is that we know that spending time in nature enhances your ability or your short-term memory. And of the studies that have been done, it shows that nature walks are actually better than taking walks in urban environments, and that trees and fields beat roads and lampposts any day, because these are natural environments give you a chance to focus, and it gives you a chance your brain to reset itself. Next slide. We know that most of us feel this, but there are studies that demonstrate that it has a significant positive effect on alleviating symptoms of depression. It can improve memory and it can improve mood, both of which are independent of each other when involved in natural environments. And so this can be an adjunct, not necessarily a cure, but certainly helpful when it takes people in an emotional state and elevates it. Next slide. We also know that for its brain effect, green spaces lessen brain fatigue. And if you think about green spaces, as I mentioned earlier with regard to trees and forests versus roads and lampposts, part of the explanation for that is it offers you a chance for directed mental attention, a soft fascination versus directed mental attention. If you think about when you're in city, you're constantly thinking about what's around you, who's there, where's the next car coming from, do I look left and right? And so you can understand that having that level of multiple angles of attention required is very different than when you're in a softer, greener environment with a chance to actually be fascinated by what's around. Next slide. So scientifically, what does it know? So this is our visceral discussion, and then now we get into some of the laboratory things, which are interesting to observe. So people have actually taken experiments of people who have spent time in nature. And we know the hemoglobin, which is a marker of oxygenation in the blood, which gives us a sense of the activity that occurs. It drops in natural environments in the prefrontal cortex. And what that means is that we see less activity going on in the prefrontal cortex, which is the home base for executive function, making hard decisions, and things like that. And so we know that that portion of the brain turns off in a natural environment, while the hemoglobin levels actually rise in the areas of the insula and the basal ganglia, which we know are associated with things like emotion, pleasure, and empathy. And so if I took a poll today and we said who wants their hemoglobin to rise in the insula and the basal ganglia, I think all of us would raise our hand. But without taking any drugs, it's just simply a matter of stepping outside and enjoying time in a natural environment. Further studies, next slide, have demonstrated that natural environments actually play a role in our immunity as well. They actually can make us healthier, make us more defensive against disease. There's certain cells within the body called natural killer cells, which are markers, and their activity are markers of our ability to create defenses against bacteria, viruses, and other things. And we know that people who spend time, significant time or sustained time in the outdoors will have increases in their natural killer activity, which is a reflection of immunity. But not only that, after they step outside of the natural environment, those natural killer cells actually remain elevated even up to 30 days later. So there's a longer lasting effect beyond just the time that you spend in specifically outdoors. Next slide. Interestingly, we know that it can also play a role in reducing inflammation. So the medical markers, the laboratory markers of inflammation include things like interleukin-6 or tumor necrosis factor alpha, which are signs of inflammatory processes going on in the body. And when measured for comparing people who spend time outside or in natural environments versus those who don't, those who are spending time outside have decreased levels of these markers of inflammation. So it's an interesting finding that ultimately leads us and points us to the concept that actually being outside in a natural environment, in a park or a forest, ultimately is good for our health. Next slide. So why isn't this more widely known? Why isn't this more widely accepted? In particular, amongst colleagues of mine who are medicine or people who play a role in the healthcare world, hospitals and healthcare. Largely, I think this is because there tends to be a communication gap which continues to narrow, in the sense that those folks who work within parks, recreation, and forests and enjoyment tend to work in what we would call a leisure field. And I think markers of kind of scientific evidence have more to do with visceral, emotional, more anecdotal types of things. I feel better when I'm outside. Whereas the public health, the medical community demands to know what is it that proves that you feel better. So they want to know your blood pressure dropped. They want to know that your cells have increased, or they want to know that your temperature has gone down and things like that, which are all very difficult studies, I think, as you can imagine, to conduct among large cohorts of people that would be accepted within the medical literature. And so this gap, I think, is shrinking because, as you've seen from the studies that I've shown you before, there's more and more evidence of just laboratory evidence of what we think are extrapolated concepts that demonstrate that there is a natural environmental effect on our individual health. And so as it connects into the next segment of why we're even here and the things that you folks are doing at the foundation and others, next slide, is that we know that the places to be are a critical component, and parks and forests provide, the how, the what, and the where. And these are the critical elements that most of us who are in healthcare are not equipped to talk about. So, most physicians will tell you that in order to combat obesity is you have to increase your physical activity or you have to eat less. Rarely will you find a physician who will say you need to exercise more or be more active, and here are the 10 parks that are near with you within 50 miles of your house. And that's the type of dialogue which I think continues to grow, and I think is a critical component to how we look at our future state of health. Next slide. So we know that outdoor activities such as hiking, biking, and camping, which are things that we do in our state parks and forests, have the greatest longevity of any of the human-powered activities. And why this is important, next slide, is because these activities lead to what we think are the gateway to better health. And this is an article, and it's cut off there a little bit, but I wrote this article in over 15 years ago with Secretary Gail Norton at the U.S. Department of the Interior that talked about how hiking, biking, and camping and the role that they play on America's public lands and outdoors are really a gateway to better individual health, because these activities, next slide, will lead to other activities like climbing, downhill skiing, snowboarding, kayaking, cross-country skiing, trail running, snowshoeing, volunteering. Whereas we know that most people who step in the outdoors for the first time won't start with these activities. If you have the ability to walk, you have the ability to hike, and if you enjoy your hiking, you'll be more inclined to do these other things. And so you can see the cascade that occurs with its connection to health. Next slide. And ultimately, how do we know this, that this is true? Well, in a survey, we know that of hundreds of adults, we know that 90% of active adult participants started between the ages of 5 and 18. So you can see now how the places that you play and the places that you are active play a critical role in the sustenance of future physical activity that leads to so much more emotional and mental well-being. Next slide. So what are the challenges, I think, in making these communication gaps? I think most people who are probably watching this today say, okay, that's all obvious. Thanks, Dr. Suk, wonderful summary of the things of nature and health. But some of the challenges that face us, I think, are also there. Next slide. So when it comes to healthcare, we have to ask the question of who pays, right? Where do the dollars go? We spend most of our dollars today spending for sick health, meaning people who get sick, we treat them, and a smaller portion of those dollars using them for prevention. And so turning or cycling some of those dollars into the world of prevention, I think you'll see in a minute, the world of public health and the world of public parks and the world of public forests, I think are merging more rapidly in terms of where these things begin to make sense and how public space becomes a part of our health prevention. Next slide. Other challenges that we face in the parks community is really to encourage higher levels of diversity within public lands. And this is just a challenge nationally, it's a challenge on a state level. And the more we can do in order to make parks and lands accessible and more relevant to communities of color, I think the better and higher impact we'll have on individual health for the reasons I stated earlier. And then additional to that, I would say the next slide is oftentimes we have to be very careful about our message, right? Oftentimes today, when you watch these glorified TV shows and things like that, Bear Grylls eating bugs or other people going or naked and afraid and all the dangers that exist out there, to some degree, we make nature and its environments a little bit scary. And I think when we address these things head on, we need to talk about being safe, safe environments, and we need to talk about the fact that bears and wolves are not in every state forest, and you don't have to worry to the degree that some sensational shows are making us worry. Next slide. So where we see opportunity in this, and this is where I think I, as an individual advocate, and many of my colleagues who I think have joined in the movement to try to bring greater attention to the role of nature and health. Next slide. Are really talking about the dominant language of what's happening today in healthcare and what the components of land and space and use and nature play a role in. So just as a generality to set the stage, when we look at health and wellness, we tend to think of 4 broad categories that play a role in our individual and also ultimately community health. So your individual behaviors contributed about 40% of your overall health and well-being. Genetics, about 30%. Healthcare, meaning having access to your hospitals and physicians, about 10%. But social and environmental factors play a full 20% role in your overall health and wellness. And what does that mean? So when you look at those things, next slide. When you look at those things, we lump them in something we call the social determinants of health, which is a common term these days, with much more clarity in terms of what we're talking about. And when you look at things on social determinants, you look at things like economic stability. How stable is the environment or the town you live in? You look at the educational level or this access to schools, access to food, whether there's food deserts or good grocery stores, access to fruits and vegetables. The community and social context, which have to do with social integration and support systems, and ultimately the healthcare system, if there is access to physicians, primary care, dentists within a system. But I skipped over one in particular because it's relevant to this discussion, because what is one of the other 6 pillars of what we call the social determinants of health is the neighborhood and the physical environment. And we know there are direct links between the aspects of housing, transportation, safety, and look at that, parks and walkability as important contributors to your individual and your community health. Next slide. All of these things contribute ultimately to these important arrows below. They contribute to your mortality, your morbidity, your life expectancy, your increases in health expenditures, your health status, and your functional limitations. And so starting this conversation about the science behind what connects us back to nature, I think is important. But on a larger societal scale, we know that lands are important ultimately to impact not only individuals, but also larger communities. Next slide. And so years ago, almost 2 decades ago, I helped start a program called Park Prescriptions. And this has taken off in a lot of different directions and continues today with a number of strong champions across the country who have enlisted physician help to provide prescriptions for usage of parks. This, I think, is still in evolution. I think there's lots of growing evidence to show that when physicians get engaged on the individual conversations for prevention and health, knowing where parks are, understanding their connection, can ultimately impact individual and community health. And this is where I think we have lots of room to grow. And I encourage you to engage your physician community. If there are any physicians on the broadcast tonight, I'd love to chat with you more. But I think it's pretty clear. The evidence is very clear. And I want to thank you all for the hard work you're doing in making sure that we have safe, clean, and natural environments for which people can enjoy and ultimately better their own individual health. Next slide. So thanks for your time. And again, Brad and the board members and foundation, I want to thank you for allowing me to spend just a few minutes with you, sharing a passion that we both share.
Doing it again. I'm talking with my microphone off. Thank you so much, Dr. Sook. That was very informative. I was particularly drawn to the directed mental attention versus soft attention and the value that brings. For those viewing, we are recording this and it will be live on our Facebook and YouTube channels. We did have a question as to whether or not we can make the slides that you shared available for people as well. So we got assure on that. So that is a lot of really good information, particularly for those who are working in the park and recreation industry, to help them to advocate for investments in those community spaces and our public spaces. So thank you very much. I'd like to turn now to recognizing our champions. And I think that Dr. Sook provided a really good background as to why we felt it was important to celebrate the work that our COVID-19 champions did during the pandemic. Our parks and forests are generally used on a fairly regular basis, but during the pandemic, visitation increased by over 23%. And that put a lot of pressures on our systems, and not just in our state parks and state forests, but our community parks as well. So I'd like to share my screen, and we're going to launch into recognizing all of the amazing work that was completed by our award winners. I also like to point out that one of the things that Dr. Sook shared with us was that the habits we develop as children stay with us throughout our lifetime, and that one of the best gifts that we could give our children is the introduction to the outdoors. And I noticed that one of the award winners' mother commented in the section that she introduced her son, Luke, who we'll meet later, to this particular place where he's stewarding when he was a child, and his passion for that place is what led him to become one of our stewards. So thank you for introducing him to that particular place in the landscape. So in addition to celebrating the amazing work of our COVID champions, we also wanted to recognize that this is the 50th anniversary of the Environmental Rights Amendment. And we feel the work of the champions helps us to support the Environmental Rights Amendment, because they were helping people to gain access to their public lands, which by this amendment, these lands belong to all of you. And the amendment says that people have a right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Pennsylvania's public natural resources are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. As trustees of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all the people. And our champions did indeed help people gain access to these public lands. I want to again thank our sponsor for tonight, REI, Recreational Equipment Incorporated. We have 5 categories of award winners. We have ambassadors, we have communication, education, public safety, and stewardship. What I'm going to be doing tonight is just giving you a brief background on each of the award winners. We're hoping to take the award show on the road and present some of the awards in person. But to get more information and more in-depth information about the award winners, you can download the program and the link that was provided in the chat box. And let's start with our first award winner. Our first award winner is Mike Teeter. Mike and his family have always loved Pennsylvania State Parks and Forests. He frequently talks about the benefits of spending time in the outdoors. I think after Dr. Sook's presentation, he has some additional talking points. And he takes every opportunity to be outdoors, not just visiting, but also picking up trash wherever he goes. As you know, we saw a lot of trash in our parks and forests in 2020. So this individual stewardship was particularly helpful. Mike also loves to share his passion for the environment with others. He's a great resource for anyone wanting to explore a park in which they are unfamiliar. And we had a lot of new visitors to our parks and forests in 2020. So having somebody to share their passion and to help them find places to explore was very helpful. So thank you, Mike, for sharing your passion and for keeping our public lands clean. Our second ambassador is Brandy Austin and her business Hike and Heal. Brandy started Hike and Heal to offer all women in the Philadelphia area a safe place to enjoy the outdoors together. She started twice monthly group hikes and supportive hangouts through her organization Hike and Heal. When COVID hit, Brandy pivoted, offering COVID-safe hikes and virtual meetings called Hopeful Hours and Healing Hours. Thank you, Brandy, for helping women improve their physical, mental, and emotional health. And as we just learned, spending time in the outdoors really does improve all of these, our physical, mental, and emotional health. So thank you for all that you do, Brandy. We're moving now to our next category, the communications team. When the pandemic hit, DCNR's Office of Communications pivoted from preparing spring events and Earth Day celebrations to, as you may remember, last year was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So they pivoted from preparing celebrations to helping people navigate the ever-changing COVID safety guidelines for our parks and forests. The communications team issued news releases, staged media interviews, created infographics and social media posts, and generated a series of videos focused on pandemic-related topics that reached millions of people. Here's 2 members of the team, Chris Novak and Terry Brady. They also sought to educate new users with videos and information, and in doing so, raise DCNR's internet presence. The other 2 members of the 4-person team were Tara Ramsey and Al German. So thank you, DCNR communications team, for helping us to be safe and for finding those places in the outdoors where we could engage in outdoor recreation. And a shout out to Art Communication Systems for sponsoring this award. Our next category is education. Angelina Capizzo didn't let the pandemic stop her from creating recreational opportunities for Upper Gwinnett Township residents. She has since switched positions. She's now with the Community Recreation Director at Montgomery Township. She created special Facebook page with online crafts for kids and adults, hosted a different story walk in the park each week, turned the lending library into a small food pantry, hosted a day camp, and collected more than 40 backpacks full of school supplies for those in need. Thank you, Angelina, for showing us that tough times are opportunities to be creative. And thank you for the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia and the Honorable Liz, and I'm sorry, for sponsoring this award. Our education state employee is Annalie Jensen. Annalie Jensen, of the program manager at Kings Gap Environmental Education Center, didn't let the newness of her position stop her from developing numerous remote programs to encourage learning and self-teaching. From storybook trails to a Discover E activity guide to virtual programs, she kept children and families engaged in the outdoors. Thank you, Annalie, for your creativity and passion for the outdoors during this time. We'll move on to public safety, and we're going to start with the DCNR Ranger staff. As COVID-19 struck the Commonwealth in the spring of 2020, Pennsylvania State Parks and Forests remained open to visitors, and the 190 park rangers and 42 forest rangers continued their work in the face of larger than normal numbers of visitors. And to put that into perspective, our state parks alone saw over 45 million visitors in 2020. This meant increased activities to address, such as litter, vandalism, illegal ATV use, search and rescues, and increased partying on our public lands. On the bright side, it also provided the rangers with the opportunity to educate new users. In addition to their own duties, many rangers perform special details at alternate work locations due to park capacity challenges. Thank you to the rangers who keep us all safe, not just during a pandemic, but every day. And we can't read all 230 rangers' names, but we're going to scroll through them. And if you are visiting a park or a forest, please take time to thank them for all that they do. For the DCNR Rangers, we had special COVID-19 safety masks made with the Ranger logo, and we will be sending them out starting next week to the Rangers. So thank you, Rangers, for all that you do. Our next state employee is Cody Miller. The task of running French Creek State Park's maintenance crew could be daunting and stressful any year. But in 2020, French Creek saw record visitation. Maintenance supervisor Cody Miller led his staff to keep the park in the best possible condition, going above and beyond in visitor services and in responding to complaints and issues in the park. Anytime something needs to be done in Region 4, where French Creek is located, and Region 4 is the eastern part of Pennsylvania, so a very heavily populated, high number of parks region. So anytime something needs to be done in Region 4, Cody does not hesitate sending staff or going himself to assist. His passion for public service can be found in his staff too. Thank you, Cody, for being a steward of these special places, and thank you to AFSCME for sponsoring this award. Hannah Wilson was a Ranger 1 at Colonel Denning and Fowler's Hollow State Parks. Hannah went above and beyond her role as a Ranger 1 in these parks. From greeting guests to sharing her knowledge, her enthusiasm never waned. Visitors to the park recognized Hannah's commitment and nominated her to show their appreciation for her work. Thank you, Hannah, for your commitment to parks and forests, your never-ending enthusiasm, and your commitment to our natural resources. Our next public safety is the DCNR Incident Management Team. The COVID-19 pandemic put the knowledge and skills of the Bureau of Forestry's Incident Management Team to the test. The experiences of these 53 staff members gathered during other incidents such as wildfires, floods, snowstorms, hurricanes, and other natural disasters place them in a unique position to exercise their incident skills for the benefit of the Commonwealth and the people of the Commonwealth. Team members assisted with the planning and layout of testing sites, assisted counties in need, and supported several logistical operations when PEMO required assistance. Thank you, team, for using your skills for the benefits of all, not just during the pandemic, but every day, every year. And the 53 members of the team are shown here alphabetically by their first name. We move now to public safety volunteers, and that's the Friends of Beltsville State Park. The task of, COVID-19 shut down the beach at Beltsville State Park for the busy Memorial Day weekend. A hiring freeze left the park very short-staffed. Park gates had to be closed on weekends due to reaching maximum capacity in the park. Some visitors ignored closed gates, trampling vegetation, and leaving litter behind. That's when the Friends of Beltsville State Park stepped in. They assisted with trash pickups. They sat at the park gates on weekends to educate visitors on the purpose of the gates and alternate places to visit, and they stepped up to serve the park where needed, such as by directing traffic. Recently, members of the Friends group took a training on Leave No Trace so they can communicate some of the Leave No Trace principles as part of their volunteerism at the park. Thank you, Friends, for keeping visitors safe and for sharing your knowledge and passion for Beltsville State Park. Our other public safety volunteers is what we call the Mask Brigade. When the pandemic hit, the need for personal protective equipment placed stress on the supply chain. With the increased use in our state parks and forests, a need arose to provide masks to protect park and forest staff. DCNR reached out to PPFF, and PPFF sent out a call to its supporters for assistance. In just a few weeks, Mask Brigade volunteers sewed 2,000 masks to distribute to state park and forest staff. The volunteers, in addition to donating their time, donated the cost of the supplies. These are our Mask Brigade volunteers, and I'd also like to recognize Jenna Berenger from our staff who coordinated the volunteers and the shipping of the masks to the individual parks and forests. Our stewardship individuals brings us to Georgetta and Luke. In 2016, Luke Miney became one of our first Stewards of Penns Woods volunteers, taking on the stewardship of Beams Rocks. Luke is the person I referred to a little bit earlier, whose mom is mentioned that she took him here when he was a child, and that's where his passion grew for this place. Beams Rocks is located on the Laurel Highlands hiking trail. He organizes cleanups of the rocks several times a year and purchased the graffiti removal equipment at his own expense. During the pandemic, as you may know, incidences of graffiti rose, but when you remove graffiti immediately, it helps to deter future vandals. Luke partnered with fellow COVID-19 champion Georgetta Frederick in the fall of 2020 for a National Public Lands Day cleanup at Wolf Rocks in Gallitzin State Forest. Georgetta worked with District Forester Bob Wetzel to come up with a solution for getting a source of water close enough to the rocks to make a cleanup effort feasible. And Luke and Georgetta raised the money needed to buy the supplies. Georgetta rallied nearly 30 volunteers, and together they removed the graffiti from this special place. So thank you, Luke and Georgetta, for keeping our parks and forests clean and for creating welcoming environments for people to feel safe and to visit and enjoy the amazing energy of these places. Our next steward individual is Amanda Galvin. You may have recognized Amanda's name a few slides back as one of our Mass Brigade members. Amanda is always looking for ways to provide a better experience for those heading into the outdoors. During the pandemic, she participated in ongoing trail work at Forbes State Forest, Stackhouse Park, and the Incline Plane bike trails in Johnstown. She helped with graffiti removal at Wolf Rocks in Gallitzin State Forest and planted trees at Canoe Creek State Park. She also volunteered her time supporting First Waves, which is a program for at-risk youth. Thank you, Amanda, for always being there and for being a steward of our special places. Our next individual is Gary Kirk. Gary is a trail steward extraordinaire during a regular year, yet in 2020, he took it to a new level. Heavy use combined with severe storms that felled trees and washed out culverts left trails in the White Clay Creek Preserve in much need of maintenance. Gary led a team of volunteers to remove down trees, repair bridges, and clear ditches on almost a daily basis, allowing the preserve to remain open. Gary also organized care for 300 native shrubs and trees that were planted in the preserve for a scout project. I also know that Gary attended not one, but 2 chainsaw safety classes back to back last year, which is a huge commitment of time. So thank you, Gary, for all that you do, for your knowledge, your hard work, and your passion for the outdoors. Our stewardship community recognizes Ryan Boutz. Ryan Boutz is the executive director of the Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy. And the Conservancy was able to continue to provide its education, conservation, outdoor stewardship, and recreation activities to the community in spite of the pandemic. Safety measures put in place allowed for their annual stream cleanup to continue with more than 1,200 participants across 364 square miles of the watershed. That is a daunting number, Ryan. Online volunteering opportunities were increased, and on-the-ground outdoor activities took place in smaller, managed groups to provide respite from COVID fatigue. Thank you, Ryan, for being a water steward and for keeping people active. Our next stewardship community award winner is Aylin Compton. Aylin is a community initiative specialist for the Park Stewardship Team in Philadelphia's Department of Parks and Recreation. When budgets were cut, she developed socially distanced volunteer events to help mitigate trash problems in the parks while continuing her monthly Second Saturday Volunteer Day program to engage and train volunteers in natural lands restorations. Aylin has also co-created and launched the Philly Forest Stewards Program and supports neighborhood park friends groups. Doing all she can to help the volunteers she serves, Aylin is a true public servant. Thank you, Aylin. Our next award winner in community category is Cindy Hogeman of the Capital Area Greenbelt Association. Cindy is a founding member of the Capital Area Greenbelt Association, and she stepped up in 2020 to become lead caretaker of the Five Senses Garden. Right as she was trying to rebuild the volunteer workforce, COVID-19 hit. She couldn't schedule large groups for spring maintenance, so instead she trained individuals and small groups to adopt and care for small plots within the garden. As a master gardener, Cindy brought sustainable gardening practices and native plants to the garden. She worked with other volunteers to restore the garden's underground watering system. She worked closely with local police to monitor for graffiti and to remove trash. And she partnered with the Harrisburg Keystone Rotary Club to restore the Martin Luther King Memorial Garden. Thank you, Cindy, for your commitment to the Greenbelt and for keeping Harrisburg beautiful. And thank you to Stahl Schaefer Engineering, who are celebrating their 15-year anniversary this year, for sponsoring this award. Our next community steward is the Tacony-Frankford Watershed Partnership. The TTF works to improve the health and vitality of the TTFF watershed in the Philadelphia region. The pandemic provided evidence that environmental justice issues and adequate access to outdoor recreation for minorities and low-income populations in this region is more important now than ever. The partnership took action to connect more deeply with their constituents. They worked with the city to distribute free lunches to children during the summer, offered safe, socially distanced walks and other outdoor activities, and created virtual bilingual tours of the park's flora and fauna. They even gave away trees for community members to plant in their yards. Thank you, Tacony-Frankford Watershed Partnership, for leading by example. And our last stewardship is in the Friends Group category, and it is the Friends of Trough Creek and Warriors Path State Parks. The Friends were in their first year of existence when the pandemic began, but they didn't let that stop them from getting things done. The Friends launched a firewood sales program at Trough Creek State Park Campground, which helps them to fund projects within the park. Members also restored the stone fireplaces found throughout Trough Creek's various picnic areas. And you may have noticed, if you've been using our parks and forests, that the number of picnickers was up. Even during the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, people were picnicking in the outdoors so they could gather with family and friends and celebrate the holidays. So thank you, Friends, for stewarding these special places. Then that's a massive load of firewood. So thank you to our sponsors and to our keynote speaker, and thank you to the award winners for all that you do. I want to recognize our sponsors again: REI, AFSCME, Art Communication System, the Chamber of Commerce, and Stahl Schaefer Engineering. Purple Lizard Maps developed the logo that we're using for the awards, and Graphics and Design developed the invitation that we sent. As I mentioned earlier, the program has been recorded and will be available on our YouTube and Facebook channels. But don't leave yet. We have a final speaker, and that is Secretary Cindy Adams Dunn. So as I take a minute to remove myself from the program, I'd like to introduce Secretary Dunn and thank her for being here with us tonight to say a few words.
Well, I tell you what, this has been a great evening. I've been taking a journey around Pennsylvania, and I feel like I've been with all of you in person. It's interesting. This week, I actually happened to be with several award winners. I was with Anilani a couple days ago, was with the Friends of Beltsville just a few hours ago, in fact. And I got back home and sat down and enjoyed this program. Incidentally, today, as I always do, I look around. You know, we all have a big selection of masks by now, and I look for my PPFF mask. It's still my favorite mask, my first mask, and still my favorite mask. And it's not just the mask I love; it's the love in which it was produced and given to our staff to help them do their essential frontline duties from day one of the COVID pandemic. I want to, give my sincere gratitude to the volunteers, the stores, and especially proud of our staff of DCNR and the way they've stepped up. And you saw the many myriad ways DCNR staff have really risen to the occasion for the extra challenges of COVID and really has shown what they're made of. And I think it's true of our volunteer stewards and our PPFF members and our board members for PPFF. It's amazing. The real measure of our commitment really isn't what we do when times are easy. It's what we do when the going gets a little rough. And I think we'd all agree that, with the COVID pandemic, it's been a rough kind of a year. And it's absolutely inspirational the way people rose up and addressed it and rose to the occasion and really doubled down on their mission and performed even better and even in a more committed way. Even, creativity, commitment, time, sweat, long hours. It's some personal risk with COVID and everything else. And so it's gratifying to think about it and understand the very importance of it. I think our staff awardees, and I'm sure the PPFF board members and volunteers and friends would say that for every person awarded here, there are many out there represented by this award that are doing the same thing and have really doubled down as well. And it's, I think what our staff would say, they're representing hundreds of other staff who also did their roles in a more creative and more committed way than ever. It's funny, from the beginning of the pandemic, I think we all knew just how essential what we do is. And the governor recognized it. Even remember the early dark days of the pandemic when it was a stay-at-home order was suggested, and it was, you can leave your home or should leave your home only for essential items like getting groceries, going to the pharmacy, or taking a walk outdoors. And the governor and the Secretary of Health recognized just how essential the outdoors was from day one. And now, listen to Dr. Suk, we understand there's real science and medicine behind that strong urge and that knowledge that we really have that the outdoors, parks and forests are just critical. So, thanks to PPFF for being our steady partner throughout the pandemic. Thank you for the volunteerism that you generate and the support you give to the friends groups across the state. Because I know for our staff, when our staff are scattered about at 179 work locations in parks and forests, they may feel a bit lonely at times when they have the volunteers there and have the committed PPFF friends groups. That that really makes it seem not so alone when we're all working in it together and working together to meet the needs and demands. So I think the thing to think about going forward, we've learned a little bit about ourselves, all of us, our awardees, PPFF, our volunteers, our friends groups. We've learned about the capacity we really have, the volunteerism, the level of work, the level of creativity that we've shown over the past year together. What do you do with that knowledge? What do you do with that capacity that perhaps we didn't know we had? And I'd suggest going back to what Marcy said in the very beginning. Marcy read the Environmental Rights Amendment in our Pennsylvania Constitution, and it's the 50th year anniversary. So let's think about 50 years from now. What does it take to create the workforce, the parks and forests on the ground, the staff to run them, the volunteerism, the committed citizenry who care about our public lands? What will it take to have that 50 years from now? What do we have to do today? The new people coming out to a park or coming out to a trail or a forest for the first time, will we engage them? Will they understand the value of this mission? Will they understand how important it is to them, how important it is to their community, how important it is to Pennsylvania? So let's think about paying it forward. It's, maybe not go back to our pre-COVID lives. I think we've been essentially changed by the pandemic. And it's not all bad. We've learned a lot of good things. We've learned about our own capacity. We've learned about commitment. And so I'd say let's double down and make the next 50 years even better than the past 50. And let's use that capacity and pay it forward. So thank you again on behalf of the staff of DCNR. Thank you and congratulations to all, both our staff and stewards and the volunteers. And I hope you feel the gratitude through the airwaves in this program tonight. And thanks again to PPFF for your stalwart support and commitment that really shown even through the toughest of times. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Dunn. And I personally want to thank you for your leadership during the pandemic. You too, and all your team, everybody had to pivot. And with the increased visitation to our parks and forests, I know that it was a really challenging time, but everybody rose. And you're right, behind every award winner, there are a lot of other people that are doing really good work. So, thank you for sharing those words and for helping us keep our eye on the future as well, as because what we're doing today really is, going to influence the future, and hopefully we can continue to build on the momentum of getting people out to bring that next level of young people in and get them excited about spending time in the outdoors. So,
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you to all of our award winners. This will be live on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Feel free to share it with family members. Rangers will be sending out the masks starting next week, and for our other award winners, we'll be in touch as to when we would like to visit you in a safe way in your communities to present you with the awards to help share the excitement of your successes with the communities that you serve. So thank you everybody for being here, and thank you for all the work that you do and for making access to the outdoors possible.